parents called me a past mistake at their wedding. Then I found out they stole my college fund from my grandparents. Now I am making my move. So I guess I should start by saying my name's Jolie, 28F. I grew up in this tiny town in Ohio, one of those places where everyone knows each other, whether you want them to or not. You walk into the local diner and someone's already got your usual coffee order ready. It's the kind of place where news spreads faster than wildfire. My parents, Diane, 52F, and Robert, 54M, were the big stars back in the day. High school sweethearts. You know, the type. Captain of the football team, head cheerleader, the whole small-town love story. They got married right after high school, and for a while, they were the couple everyone looked up to. For the first few years, it was good. Or at least that's how it seemed to me as a kid. We had this cozy little house with a picket fence, the kind of house that felt like it came straight out of a cheesy movie. There were photos of the three of us all over the place. Family barbecues, birthdays, Christmases by the fireplace, the works. If you looked at us from the outside, you'd think we were the perfect family. But, you know, when you're a kid, you don't really notice when things start to crack. You just think everything's normal. I guess I started picking up on things when I was about 8 or so. I remember the first time I heard my parents really arguing. And not the usual stuff like whose turn it was to take out the trash or what show to watch. No, this was different. It was late at night and I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard their voices through the walls. My mom was yelling and my dad was yelling back. I don't remember exactly what they said, but I remember lying there, my heart pounding, feeling like something was really wrong. It was the kind of yelling that makes you feel small, you know, like you just want to shrink and disappear. After that, the fights became pretty much a nightly thing. It didn't matter what time it was. Their voices would echo through the house. Sometimes I'd hear plates clinking or a door slamming. I'd bury my head under my pillow trying to drown it out. But in a house that small, there's really nowhere to hide from it. The weird thing is, during the day, they'd act like nothing happened. My mom would still pack my lunch, and my dad would give me these half-hearted smiles before heading to work. It was like they were trying to keep the act going. But even as a kid, I knew something was off. Things really took a turn when my dad lost his job at the factory. The factory was basically the backbone of the whole town. Most of the people I knew worked there, including my dad. And when it shut down, it was like a domino effect. Suddenly, people were struggling. Businesses were closing, and the whole place felt like it was falling apart. For us, it was like someone pulled the rug out from under us. My dad had been working there since high school, and he didn't have any other skills or training. So finding a new job wasn't easy. At first, I thought my dad was just going through a rough patch. You know, I figured he'd be back on his feet soon enough. But weeks turned into months, and it was like he'd given up. He'd sit on the couch all day, staring at the TV, barely saying a word to me or my mom. Sometimes he'd just leave without saying where he was going, and when he came back, he'd look even more down. My mom started working more shifts at the diner to make up for the money we were losing, and the tension between them only got worse. It wasn't long before my grandparents noticed things weren't right. They lived nearby, both sets of them. My paternal grandparents, George, 75M, and Martha, 73F, had a small farm just outside town. They were the kind of grandparents you read about in stories. Grandpa George always had a story to tell, and Grandma Martha was constantly baking something. I'd go there a lot when things got too tense at home. I guess you could say it was my escape. Grandpa would help me with homework or show me how to fix things around the farm, and it felt normal. It felt safe. Then there were my mom's parents, Harold, 78M, and Betty, 76F, who lived in town. Grandpa Harold owned the hardware store. Small, but it was his pride and joy. He'd let me help out sometimes, teaching me how to fix little things like leaky faucets or loose hinges. Grandma Betty was one of those people who was involved in everything. Church bake sales, the animal shelter, you name it. She dragged me along to help, and at first I hated it. But over time, it became another place where I felt like I belonged. Around that time, it was clear my parents were just done with each other. My mom was practically living at the diner, pulling double shifts, and when she was home, she'd barely look at my dad. I don't think I've ever seen two people who were so good at avoiding each other in such a small house. My dad wasn't much better. When he was home, he'd either be out in the garage, fiddling with who knows what, or he'd be passed out on the couch. It was like they were pretending I didn't exist, or maybe they just didn't have the energy to care anymore. I remember one night when I was about 10, My mom came home from work and found my dad in the same spot he'd been in that morning, sprawled out on the couch, empty bottles around him. She lost it. I'd never heard her scream like that before, and I don't think I ever will again. She threw one of the bottles against the wall, and it shattered, pieces flying everywhere. I just stood there in the hallway, frozen, feeling like I shouldn't be there, but unable to move. That night, she packed a bag and left for my grandparents' house. The next day, she filed for divorce. I overheard her on the phone with her lawyer, and even though I didn't understand everything at the time, I knew this was it. My family was falling apart. The divorce was a nightmare. They fought over every little thing, the house, the car, even the old couch that was barely holding together. It felt like the only time they spoke to each other was when they were arguing about who would get what. During all that, I practically lived with my grandparents. It was like I was in limbo, bouncing between houses, trying to find some kind of normal in all the chaos. My grandparents did their best to keep me out of it, but there's only so much they could do. The court stuff went on for what felt like forever. And by the time it was all over, my parents were like strangers to me. They split custody, but they were too busy fighting their own battles to pay much attention to me. I'd go back and forth between their houses, but honestly, I spent most of my time with my grandparents. They were the only ones who seemed to care about how I was doing. They'd take me fishing, teach me stuff about the farm, and keep me busy so I wouldn't think about the mess my parents had made of everything. I clung to those moments, trying to hold on to the feeling of being a part of something normal. Looking back, I realized that's when things really started to change between me and my parents. They were so caught up in their own drama that they stopped seeing me as their kid and more like a leftover from a failed relationship. And honestly, I think that's when I started seeing them differently too. All right, so let me set the scene. I was 18, fresh out of high school, and finally getting out of that tiny Ohio town. I got accepted to Ohio State University, and I couldn't have been more excited. It felt like a ticket out, like I could finally leave behind all the mess and start my own life. I had no clue what I was really in for, but that's probably what made it exciting. Moving out was kind of a blur. My parents were both there, but it was awkward. They didn't talk much to each other, just quick exchanges about packing or reminding me to double check for stuff. It was almost like they were doing it out of obligation rather than because they cared. My mom gave me one of those side hugs, and my dad just kind of patted me on the back and said, "Well, good luck, kid." That was it. I thought it was strange, but I was too eager to leave to really think about it. College was everything I hoped it would be, and then some. I met my roommate, Tom, who'd end up being my best friend for life, and we clicked instantly. We bonded over video games and sci-fi movies, the kind of stuff I never really got to enjoy back home. It was like, for the first time, I had a real friend who wasn't tied up in all the family drama. Tom and I would stay up late playing games, and we became like siblings. I felt like I was finally building something for myself, something separate from my parents and all their issues. At first, I'd call my parents every couple of weeks. It felt like the right thing to do, you know? I was trying to stay connected, even if things were weird between us, but those calls never really felt like anything. My mom would ask if I was keeping up with my studies, and my dad would ask if I was staying out of trouble, and that was about it. No real warmth, no, "we miss you," or "come visit when you can," just quick, almost business-like conversations. I started spacing out the calls because it felt pointless. I'd call on birthdays and holidays and they'd do the same, but there wasn't much else beyond that. It was a few months into my freshman year when I started noticing things felt off. I remember scrolling through Facebook during a study break, and I stumbled upon a post that threw me for a loop. It was my mom dressed in a wedding gown, and she wasn't standing alone. Right next to her was Mark, the guy she'd been seeing for a couple of years. They were smiling, all lovey-dovey, and the caption read, "Just married, excited for our new beginning." I just stared at the screen for a few seconds trying to wrap my head around it. My first reaction was confusion. I mean, yeah, I knew she was dating Mark, but marriage? I had no clue it was that serious. I kept thinking, wait, when did this happen? And why the hell didn't she tell me? I felt a knot form in my stomach. I scrolled through the comments expecting to see something, anything about me, but nope. There were just the usual congratulations from people in town, not a single mention of why her only daughter wasn't there. It felt like a punch to the gut. I called her right away, but it went straight to voicemail. I shot her a text, something like, "Hey, I just saw your post. When did you get married? Why didn't you tell me?" I tried to keep it casual, but honestly, I was hurt. I waited for a reply, but hours went by, then days. Nothing. It was like I didn't even exist. It took her almost a week to respond. And when she did, her excuse was that they had kept the wedding small and private, and that things had been so hectic, they forgot to invite me. Forgot? I remember staring at my phone, feeling my face get hot. How does a mom forget to invite her only kid to her wedding? It didn't make any sense, and I was furious. But at the same time, it was like part of me wasn't surprised. It just felt like another way they were pushing me further out of their lives. I tried to move on, but it was hard to shake off. It was all I could think about for the next couple of weeks. I didn't tell Tom about it. I wasn't ready to get into all the drama. I just kept it bottled up, telling myself it was no big deal and that I shouldn't care. But deep down, it ate at me. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. It was only about 2 weeks later. I was scrolling through Facebook again, because I hadn't learned my lesson, when another post popped up. This time it was my dad. He was wearing a tux, grinning next to his girlfriend of 2 years, Lisa, 49F. They had gotten married too. And just like with my mom's wedding, I hadn't been invited. No heads up, no nothing. It was another just married post with a bunch of people in town commenting about how happy they were for them. I didn't even hesitate. I called my dad, and when he actually picked up, I laid into him. I asked him why he didn't tell me he was getting married, why I wasn't there, why nobody thought to call me. His response was something I'll never forget. He laughed. He actually laughed and said, "Jolie, who wants their past mistakes showing up at their wedding when they're starting fresh?" I just sat there stunned. My own father called me a past mistake, like I was some kind of burden he couldn't wait to be free of. I don't know if he meant it as a joke, but it didn't feel like one. It felt like a slap in the face. I hung up without saying anything. I just sat there staring at the wall, feeling this weird mix of anger and sadness. I guess in that moment, I realized how little I meant to them. It was like they were moving on with their lives, and I was just a reminder of everything they wanted to leave behind. I didn't know what to do with all that. I felt stuck, like I was spiraling. I tried to distract myself with school and work, but it kept gnawing at me. So I called my grandparents. They've always been my safety net, and I needed to hear their voices. I asked them if they knew about the weddings, and to my surprise, they were just as shocked as I was. Turns out they only got invited last minute, like days before each event. And when they asked about me, my parents told them I was too busy to come. That was when everything started to click. My parents had lied to them too. My grandparents were furious, and honestly, so was I. But beyond the anger, there was this deep, sinking feeling. It felt like my parents had decided somewhere along the line that I didn't fit into their lives anymore. They'd both moved on and found new people, and there was no room for me in their new lives. Hearing my grandparents so upset made me realize that it wasn't just me they were cutting out. They were pushing away everyone who had ever cared about them. It was like they were burning bridges left and right, and we were all just caught in the fallout. At that point, I didn't know what to think. I was hurt, angry, and confused all at once. I didn't know why they were doing this, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was a choice they made, and I was the one left picking up the pieces. So after the whole wedding disaster, I needed answers. My parents' behavior was so out of line that it felt like there had to be more going on. Why were they acting like I was nothing to them? And why did they lie to my grandparents about me being too busy to attend their weddings? None of it added up. I was sick of feeling like an outsider in my own family, and I decided I was done sitting around feeling sorry for myself. I flew back to Ohio to see my grandparents. It had been a while since I'd been home, and even though the memories of my parents' mess made me dread going back, I felt like I needed to be there. When I stepped off the plane and saw the familiar sights, the tiny regional airport, the faded posters advertising local tourist traps, the single luggage carousel squeaking as it circled, I felt a weird mix of nostalgia and anger. I had so many good memories here, but it felt like everything was tainted now. My paternal grandparents, George and Martha, picked me up. They were happy to see me, but I could tell they were worried too. Grandma Martha kept asking if I was eating enough, if I was taking care of myself, and Grandpa George kept making jokes, trying to keep the mood light. But even in the car ride back to their farm, I could feel this tension. Like we all knew there was something we needed to talk about, but no one wanted to start. When we got back to their place, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Everything was just as I remembered. The old farmhouse, the porch swing, even the smell of fresh-baked bread coming from the kitchen. It felt like home in a way my parents' houses never did. We sat down at the kitchen table, and after some small talk, I decided to just rip the Band-Aid off. I asked them point blank why my parents didn't want me at their weddings and why they had lied about me being too busy. That's when they both exchanged this look, and I could tell they had something they hadn't told me. Grandma sighed, and Grandpa rubbed the back of his neck like he was trying to figure out where to start. Finally, Grandma said, "Jolie, there's something we need to tell you. We didn't want to get you involved, but it's time you know the truth." She pulled out a manila folder from the drawer by the table and handed it to me. Inside were a bunch of papers, legal documents, signed agreements, and receipts. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. Then it hit me. These were loan agreements, the kind of stuff people sign when they're borrowing a lot of money. And at the top of one of the documents, I saw my parents' names and the words college tuition. Turns out my grandparents had lent my parents a significant amount of money when I got accepted into Ohio State. My parents told them they couldn't afford to pay for my education on their own, so my grandparents agreed to help, thinking they were investing in my future. The loan was supposed to cover my tuition, but when I added up the numbers, it was way more than what college should have cost. I felt my hands tighten around the papers as I realized my parents had taken advantage of them. Grandpa leaned forward and said, "We wanted to help you, Jolie. We thought it would be good for you to know your parents had a hand in your education, that they were supporting you. We hoped it might bring you all closer." Grandma nodded, her eyes looking sadder than I'd ever seen. "But your parents haven't paid back a single dime. It's been 6 years since you graduated, and they've made no effort." Hearing that made me feel sick. I'd gone all these years thinking my parents had scraped and saved for me, that they were the ones who sacrificed. But it wasn't them. It was my grandparents, and they had lied to me the whole time. I felt my face heat up, my chest tight. It was like everything I'd believed about my parents just crumbled right there at that kitchen table. I asked them why they hadn't told me sooner. Grandma explained that they didn't want to put me in the middle of it. They knew my relationship with my parents was already strained, and they hoped my parents would eventually do the right thing and start paying back the loan. "We didn't want to cause any more damage, especially when you were doing so well in school and starting your own life," Grandpa said. But after what they did with the weddings and the lies, we couldn't keep quiet anymore. I didn't know what to say. I felt angry, hurt, and confused all at once. It was like every time I thought I'd hit rock bottom with them, there was always something worse. I felt stupid for not seeing it earlier, for believing they cared about me even a little. I could tell my grandparents felt guilty for not telling me, but I didn't blame them. They were only trying to protect me, unlike my parents, who were clearly only looking out for themselves. I stayed silent for a while, just staring at the papers. My grandparents let me sit with it, not pushing me to say anything. When I finally spoke, I asked what they planned to do next. That's when Grandpa told me they were considering taking legal action. They'd reached out to an old friend of his who was a lawyer, and he said they had a strong case. There was a clear breach of contract, and given the amount of money involved, they could sue for repayment. Hearing that was a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, I felt glad my grandparents were finally standing up for themselves. They'd done nothing but help my parents, and they deserved justice. But on the other hand, it felt like things were about to get even messier. A lawsuit meant dragging everything out into the open, and in a town like ours, people talked a lot. I knew this was going to become the latest gossip, and I felt bad for my grandparents having to deal with all that. I asked them if they were sure about going through with it, and Grandpa nodded. "Jolie, we can't let them get away with this. They've taken advantage of our kindness, and they've hurt you in the process. It's time they face the consequences." Grandma squeezed my hand and said, "We've always been there for you, and we're not going to let them do this to you or us any longer." That night, I stayed up late, sitting on the porch swing, staring up at the stars like I used to when I was a kid. But instead of feeling the calm I usually did, all I felt was anger. I couldn't believe how selfish my parents had been. They didn't just steal money, they stole trust. And the worst part? They tried to make me believe they were the ones who had sacrificed for me. It was like they were rewriting history, and I was the fool who bought it all. The next morning, we drove over to my maternal grandparents' house to fill them in. They were just as upset, maybe even more so. Grandpa Harold, the practical one, had already spoken with his lawyer friend and was all set to move forward. "What your parents did wasn't just morally wrong, it was illegal. We're going to make sure they pay for this," he said. and there was a determination in his voice I hadn't heard before. I left that visit knowing things were about to get intense. It felt like everything was coming to a head, and there was no way to avoid it now. My parents had crossed too many lines, and I was done letting them walk all over the people I loved. After everything I'd learned about my parents using my college fund and with my grandparents ready to sue, things felt tense, like a storm was coming. I wasn't sure how it would all play out, but I knew one thing. I couldn't just sit back and watch it unfold from a distance. I wanted answers, and more than that, I needed to confront my parents face to face. I wanted to see how they'd react when they realized they couldn't keep hiding behind lies. It didn't take long for my parents to catch wind that I was back in town. In a place like ours, news spreads fast, and I'm sure some relative or well-meaning neighbor must have let it slip. Anyway, it wasn't a surprise when my parents showed up at my grandparents' farm, completely uninvited. I was out back fixing one of the fences when I saw their car pull up, and immediately, I knew this was going to be a mess. My grandparents, George and Martha, came out of the house when they saw my parents step out of the car. I could feel the tension even before anyone said a word. My dad was the first to speak. He had this forced smile like he was trying to act friendly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Jolie, can we talk?" he said, his tone so casual it made my skin crawl. I wasn't buying it for a second. I exchanged a look with my grandparents, and we all knew this wasn't the place to have it out. We didn't want to drag everything into the open right there in the driveway. So, after a quick discussion, we agreed to meet them at the local diner later that day. It was neutral ground, and more importantly, it was public. I figured they'd be less likely to cause a scene if we were surrounded by people. When we got to the diner, my parents were already there, sitting in one of the corner booths. My mom was fidgeting with a napkin, and my dad had his arms crossed, staring out the window. It was weird seeing them like that, so put together, but clearly uncomfortable. It was like they were dreading what was coming, which made me think they knew exactly why we were there. We sat down, and for a moment, it was just silent. You could hear the clinking of dishes and the quiet hum of the diner's AC, but no one at our table said anything. Finally, my mom broke the silence, putting on this fake smile and saying, "It's so good to see you, Jolie. We've missed you." The words felt so hollow. I wanted to laugh, but I just stared at her, not even bothering to respond. I wasn't interested in small talk. I got straight to the point. "Why didn't you tell me about the weddings?" I asked. "And why did you tell Grandma and Grandpa that I was too busy to come?" My dad scoffed and leaned back, crossing his arms tighter. "You know, Jolie, we wanted a fresh start. We didn't think dragging our past mistakes into it would be helpful." That word again. Mistakes. I felt my fists clenching under the table. My mom jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "It wasn't like that, Jolie. We just thought you wouldn't want to come. You've been so distant lately, and we figured it was better this way." She gave me this look like she was trying to make me feel guilty for not being more present in their lives, and it made my blood boil. "You didn't invite me because you wanted a fresh start," I shot back. "You didn't invite me because you were ashamed and didn't want to face the truth about everything you've done." My dad rolled his eyes and muttered, "Here we go." That's when I brought up the college fund. I told them how I'd found out they borrowed money from my grandparents and never paid it back. Their faces dropped. My mom's eyes widened and my dad's jaw tightened. They knew they'd been caught. Instead of apologizing or showing any kind of remorse, they started making excuses. My mom said, "We always meant to pay it back, but we hit hard times and it just got complicated." She acted like it was no big deal, like borrowing a huge sum of money and not paying it back was just a small misunderstanding. My dad, on the other hand, tried to downplay the whole thing. "It's just money," he said, shrugging. "I'm sure your grandparents are fine without it." That was the last straw for my grandparents. Grandma Martha, who'd been sitting quietly the whole time, finally spoke up. She looked my dad straight in the eye and said, "It's not just money, Robert. It's trust. We trusted you to do right by Jolie, and you didn't. You've done nothing but lie and take advantage of us." I've never seen my grandparents look so angry, and I think it shocked my parents too. My mom tried to put on the waterworks, her eyes filling with tears as she said, "We never meant for any of this to happen. We were just trying to get by, and we thought things would turn around." She reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me with their fake apologies and crocodile tears. My dad, seeing that this tactic wasn't working, got defensive. "You know what? Maybe if your grandparents didn't hold on to their money so tightly, we wouldn't be in this situation." He slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. At this point, people in the diner started glancing our way. I could feel the heat rising in my face, not just from the anger, but from the embarrassment of having this scene play out in front of everyone. Grandpa George stood up, his voice firm. "That's enough. We're done here. We've given you enough chances, and you've done nothing but take and lie. The next time we meet, we'll be in court." My parents looked stunned, like they couldn't believe my grandparents were actually following through. My mom tried to say something else, but my grandparents walked out and I followed. As we left, I could hear people whispering. In a small town, it doesn't take much for a rumor to start, and I knew by the next morning everyone would be talking about how my parents' dirty laundry was being aired out in the middle of the diner. Part of me felt bad for my grandparents, knowing they'd have to face that gossip, but another part of me felt relieved. My parents couldn't hide anymore, and I was done playing along with their lies. Back at the farm, I sat down with my grandparents. They were upset, but they also seemed determined. We talked for a while, and they reassured me that they were making the right choice. "We have to stand up for what's right," Grandpa George said, "and we have to show them that actions have consequences." I could see how much it hurt them to be in this position, but I also knew they were doing it because they cared about me. Later that evening, we got a call from Grandpa Harold's lawyer friend. He told us the case looked strong, and we had a solid shot at winning. It was good to hear, but it also felt heavy. This wasn't just some legal battle. It was a family war. And even if we won, there was no coming back from this. The damage was already done. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything. I thought about how different things could have been if my parents had just been honest. But they weren't, and they never would be. They only cared about themselves, and it was time they faced the consequences. I knew things would get messy, and I knew the town would talk, but for once, I didn't care. I was done covering for them. It was time for them to finally take responsibility for everything they'd done. Update 1. The lawsuit started moving fast. Grandpa Harold's lawyer friend didn't waste any time. He knew what he was doing, and with all the evidence we had, he was confident we'd win. But the whole thing felt like a cloud hanging over us. Even though my grandparents and I were prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to get uglier before it got better. And well, I was right. My parents must have realized they were in serious trouble because they started calling nonstop using numbers I didn't recognize, since I'd already blocked their regular ones. I ignored most of the calls, but one day they left a voicemail that stood out. My mom's voice was shaky, almost desperate, and she said something like, "Jolie, please, we need to talk. This lawsuit is ruining everything. We just want to make things right." I rolled my eyes, listening to her pleading, knowing it was just another attempt to manipulate me. A few days later, my grandparents got a similar call. This time, my dad was the one practically begging. "If this goes through, we'll lose everything," he said. "We're already struggling, and if the court rules against us, we're done for." He tried to guilt-trip them, talking about how their new lives were falling apart because of the lawsuit. It was all very porous, and not once did he apologize for what they did. They were only sorry because they got caught. Despite all that, my grandparents stayed firm. They told them if they wanted to talk, they'd see us in court. That was the end of it, and we didn't hear from them again after that, at least not directly. But of course, it's a small town and nothing stays quiet for long. Gossip was spreading everywhere, and before we knew it, people were picking sides. Some folks thought my grandparents were doing the right thing, standing up for what was owed, but others, especially people close to my parents, accused us of being vindictive and trying to ruin their lives. I tried to ignore the chatter, but it was hard. Every time I went into town, I'd catch people staring or whispering. One time I overheard someone say, "It's a shame what they're doing to their own daughter." But I guess that's what happens when money's involved. It was infuriating knowing that some people still saw my parents as victims, even after all the lies and manipulation. But I kept reminding myself that this wasn't about what people thought. It was about getting justice for my grandparents. The court date finally came, and it felt like everyone in town knew about it. My grandparents, their lawyer, and I all showed up early. We were prepared for a long, drawn-out fight. But when we got there, we saw my parents sitting outside the courtroom looking completely defeated. My dad was staring down at the floor, and my mom was holding her head in her hands. They didn't even look up when we walked past. Just as we were getting ready to go in, their lawyer approached us. He asked if we could talk privately before the hearing started. My grandparents agreed, but I could tell they were on edge, and honestly, so was I. We followed him into one of those side rooms, and when we sat down, he started laying it all out. Apparently, my parents had hit rock bottom. My mom's boss at the diner had caught wind of the lawsuit through town gossip, and she ended up losing her job. My dad had been forced to sell his truck, which was pretty much the only asset he had left, and he'd taken a low-paying job just to make ends meet. But that wasn't the kicker. Both of their new spouses had walked out on them. When they found out about the lawsuit and the money my parents owed, they bailed. My parents were left with nothing, and they were desperate to avoid further ruin. The lawyer told us they wanted to settle. They were willing to pay back every cent they owed, plus interest, by selling their houses and cars. They also promised to write formal apologies to me and my grandparents, admitting their wrongdoing. It was a lot to take in. Part of me felt this rush of satisfaction, like they were finally facing the consequences of their actions. But another part of me felt this weird sense of sadness. I mean, it was my family, and even though they'd hurt me so much, seeing them fall apart like this was rough. My grandparents and I talked it over with our lawyer. We had the upper hand, and we could have pushed for more. But in the end, my grandparents decided to accept the settlement. I think they just wanted it all to be over. They'd been through enough, and they didn't want to drag things out any longer than they had to. It was a chance to put this whole ugly chapter behind us, and they took it. The next day, my parents signed over their assets and handed in the written apologies. I remember reading my dad's letter, and for the first time it felt like maybe he understood what he'd done. He wrote about how he knew he'd failed me as a father and how he regretted calling me a mistake. My mom's letter was similar. She admitted to using me as an excuse to get money from my grandparents and apologized for all the lies. It was weird reading those words, seeing them finally own up to everything, but at the same time it didn't feel like enough. After everything was signed and settled, my grandparents invited my parents to join us for lunch as a kind of peace offering. I wasn't sure it was a good idea, but I went along with it. We met at the same diner where everything had blown up before. The atmosphere was heavy, and no one really knew what to say. My parents looked like shadows of their former selves, exhausted and broken. We tried to make small talk, but it was awkward, with long silences that felt like they lasted forever. At one point, my mom reached across the table like she wanted to hold my hand. I pulled back, and she gave me this look of hurt. "Jolie, we really are sorry," she said quietly. "We know we messed up, and we're trying to fix it." I nodded, but I didn't say much. It wasn't that I didn't believe her. It's just that the trust was gone. Words weren't going to fix that. It would take time, and honestly, I wasn't sure if time was enough. We wrapped up the lunch with polite goodbyes. My grandparents hugged my parents, but I kept my distance. I could see they were trying, and maybe one day things would be different. But right then, I needed space. I'd spent so many years trying to be a part of their lives, only to get pushed aside. Now, it was my turn to step back and figure things out for myself. The next few weeks felt like a blur. My grandparents got the money from the settlement, and they were finally able to relax, knowing they got back what was owed to them. I went back to Chicago, but this time, I made a promise to visit my grandparents every other weekend. I realized how much they'd done for me over the years, and I didn't want to take them for granted anymore. They'd shown me what real family looked like, people who stuck by you no matter what, even when things got rough. As for my parents, I decided to keep my distance. I told them I needed time and space to heal, and that if there was any chance of a future relationship, it'd depend on their actions, not just their words. It was hard to walk away, but I knew it was the right thing to do. In the end, this whole experience taught me a lot. It showed me that blood doesn't always make a family. Actions do. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones who are supposed to protect you. But it also showed me that there are people who will stand by you no matter what. For me, those people are my grandparents, and I'm lucky to have them. So, that's where things stand. The lawsuit is behind us. My parents are dealing with the fallout of their choices, and I'm focusing on the people who actually care about me. It's not the ending I wanted, but it's the one I got. And for now, that's enough.